Chapter 15. Lisa could hear Brett drumming her fingers on the arm of her wheelchair. Then again, louder this time. Her eyes closed. Lisa ignored her, concentrated on writing out a spasm without grinding her teeth. Bella had told her that sometimes patients respond to pain by clenching their jaws together, which just creates more problems later on. Lisa hadn't realized she'd been doing it until Val pointed it out. Now she had to break herself out of the habit. Brett began to hum, something between a nursery rhyme and the national anthem, badly. "If you're doing that to get on my nerves, it's working," Lisa said. "Sorry." Brett rolled a chair over beside Lisa's bed. "You asleep?" "Certainly not now," Lisa said dryly. "Exactly. What is it about the concept of resting that you don't understand?" "Yeah," said Brett. "Aren't we in a great mood?" Lisa sighed and opened her eyes. "Can't all be as bubbly as you now, can we?" It was Brett's turn to sigh. "Cripes, Lisa. After 3 weeks, you'd think you'd get tired of the poor me routine?" Lisa closed her eyes again, but not to shut out her roommate, as Brett probably thought. Squeezing her eyelids tight was the only way she could keep the tears from slipping out. Tears that had become more and more frequent in the last few days. Brett had been at the rehab several weeks before Lisa arrived, so she had more time to get used to it all. Waking up to the pain every day, enduring the agony of physio, coping with the loss of freedom to move around the way she had once, even putting up with the humiliation of the damn Kadir. All these were bad enough. But for Lisa, these weren't even the worst of it. It was seeing every day the wreckage that had once been her body. Of course, that part was difficult for anyone, but as for Dan had pointed out to her earlier that week, it was even harder for young people. Body image is many times more important to a teenager than to someone my age, he told her during an examination. Lisa had been crying when he'd arrived, and he'd explained that everything she was feeling was perfectly normal. Teenagers who have had debilitating injuries worry about how strangers will react to them, then worry about not being accepted by their peers, about not being attracted to the opposite sex. He waited a moment, allowing his acknowledgement of her fears to register before continuing. And this physiological trauma is compounded even more by the fact that young people don't have the same life experiences they can draw on to put their injuries onto perspective. At this, Lisa had sobbed even louder. "I know you've had a rough time this past year, Lisa. The loss of your sister was a terrible thing, and I'm not trying to diminish that." He'd given her a moment to realize this was true. Then, "Do you remember that first day when I said your youth was an advantage, that you would heal faster than an old person?" Not waiting for an answer, he continued, "Youth can be a double-edged sword. Yes, you'll heal faster, but for young people, injuries like yours seem more traumatic and long-lasting than they would for an older person. The advantage of age is that older people have been through so much more in their lives. They realize that although this is terrible, it's not as devastating as this thing that happened 10 years ago, or that thing that happened 20 years ago." All of this made sense to Lisa, but it was then nonetheless difficult not seeing the improvement she saw in those around her. The doctor had told her there would be periods during her rehabilitation where she would plateau, but these periods would eventually pass. She just had to be patient. Understanding that and accepting it, however, were two different things. As the days turned into weeks, she found herself becoming more withdrawn, less willing to involve herself with life on the 6th floor. Every free moment she seemed to spend napping. Even if visits with Jen and Robin weren't enough to put her out of the funk. They had come by a few times after her mother had called them, but they hadn't stayed long, and Lisa could understand why it was painful for her to try making conversations when they had nothing in common. Lisa's days were one therapy after another, trying to cope with the pain. Theirs were filled with summer jobs, shopping afternoons at the beach, new boyfriends. Of course her parents still came every day, that is her mother did, sometimes even twice, despite the fact that it took away time from the decorating work she contracted. Being self-employed made it easier for her to get away, unlike Jack, whose work, she said, was the reason he hadn't visited much. It seemed important to her that Lisa believed the lie, so she pretended for a while that she did. Now even pretending seemed like too much effort. What was the point? "So you want to know my news?" Lisa opened her eyes again to see Brett still parked by her bed. "You finally killed someone with that wheelchair of yours?" she said humorously. "No, even better. You're sick? And you're a pissant, but I'm not holding that against you. Come on, guess." Lisa automatically clenched her teeth. and it forced them apart. She wrote another spasm to its end. I don't feel like guessing. Brett sighed, then moved even closer to the bed. Okay, you jacked it out of me, fresh meat, she said. Lisa stared at her blankly. You want to talk to me about food? No, stupid. We had a meal on the floor today. How old? 80, 90? I said fresh meat, didn't I? He's about your age, I think. Another patient? No, that's the best part. He's a volunteer, non-gimp, has the use of all extremities. And, she narrowed her eyes, mighty fine-looking extremities they are, too. Now it was Lisa's eyes that widened. Aren't you almost a married woman? How'd you like Sam to find out you've been checking out other guys? She'd met Brett's boyfriend the weekend before, and Brett had shown nearly everyone in the hospital the engagement ring Sam had given her. Proposed in the cafeteria. She gushed to Carly and Lisa later. Got down on his knee and everything. Sam had wanted to set the date right then, but Brett wasn't making any plans until she got back on her feet. I'm walking down the aisle, she told them. Carly, of course, had said that she was relieved to hear that. I wouldn't want to read in the wedding announcements what a bunch of bridesmaids were being mowed down by a wheelchair. Brett made a face now at Lisa. It's not me I was checking him out for, stupid. It's you. Lisa suddenly felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. She lowered her eyes. It's not funny. Who's trying to be funny? He's cute and got kind of all moody bad boy thing going on, but I think that's all show. Seemed nice, though. Lisa turned her head toward the wall, or tried to turn it, made the pretense of doing it so. The best thing is, he's coming back. No response. I think you'll like him. Really? Nothing. Look, he beats the hell out of nap time. Still nothing. Okay, geez, sorry I brought it up. Brett returned to her side of the room, and Lisa could hear her rummaging in her locker for a chocolate bar. Moments later, she left, and Lisa knew where she was headed. First to the pop machine for Pepsi, then to the third floor big screen TV and her favorite soap. Brett was so predictable. She was also a good friend to everyone on the floor, even the screamer whose room she dropped into a couple times a day. Although Stephen could not respond to her, he seemed to know she was there. He seemed to enjoy listening to her chatter about nothing and everything, keeping him up to date on all that happened in the building, including the big proposal. Brett was being a friend to Lisa too. She knew that. What Brett didn't know, though, was that guys were the last thing she wanted in her life right now. Lisa had never been really comfortable with guys. Sure, she dated, but there had never been anyone who would ask her out more than 2 or 3 times, which was probably her fault. The overachiever thing Ellen had often told her was that she was far too serious. You need to loosen up, his sister would say. Let yourself have fun. But there was also schoolwork to do, committees to serve on, plenty to keep her busy, and then Ellen's illness. So even under different circumstances, Lisa had felt uncomfortable about meeting some guy, throwing the bandages, the fixators, and the wheelchair, and all the rest of it, and yet some fairly solid reasons for not getting excited over meeting a male. Besides, any teenager who would spend his free time volunteering at a rehab center had to have something wrong with him.